I'm Alma Langlois, and these are the obsessive thoughts screaming through my brain when I'm alone in the dark. It's Halloween Eve, and what better way to honor the holiday than honoring one of horror's greatest auteurs, George A. Romero. Of the horror filmmaking titans of the 70s and 80s, George Romero was always my personal favorite, and the most influential. When I was initially studying filmmaking, I doubled and tripled down on my obsession with regional genre filmmakers. I think some people thought it was my way of trashing the Academy.
Perhaps it takes... Mr. West, I suggest you get yourself a pen. Class dismissed.
But to me, the work of those filmmakers was a more practical, achievable goal. And Romero, who's both an adept technician and a fantastic storyteller, showed how he made great artistic use out of limited resources. George is also the most maverick of the bunch. While his fellow horror contemporaries either started in LA or they moved there early in their careers hoping to get an in the studio system, Romero remained in Pittsburgh, making mostly independently financed films.
That it's like working in a foreign country, working in Pittsburgh.
It gives you a lot of freedom.
And in addition to freedom, it gives you a different perspective. You're not so much a victim of trends, of popular thinking, of, what's in the state-of-the-art head right now.
I left filmmaking after discovering that after dealing with Hollywood people, Charles Manson was starting to make a lot more sense.
Lawyers play with people, and I'm a person.
And honestly, I don't really like working with other people.
I'm antisocial. I'm becoming dangerously amoral.
So I returned to what I love most, horror fiction writing. But I still see the influence Romero's had on me. I never got to meet him, but I saw him at a screening at Night of the Living Dead in Chicago, where he was doing an after-film talk Q&A and with the audience. One guy asked him how he had managed to stay in the movie business for over 30 years without sinking to the lowest common denominator. Then George responded in that great, scratchy smoker's voice, "You don't think I've sunk to the lowest common denominator? 'Cause man, I've been trying." The Dead trilogy is what he'll always be remembered for, and of course, Romero will always be most famous for the groundbreaking Night of the Living Dead, which introduced the modern movie zombie to audiences and set the template for a new kind of nihilistic visceral horror film. But today, I'm talking about the film Romero is cited as his personal favorite of all his films, and it's also my personal favorite of his, Martin. Is Martin really an 84-year-old vampire? Or is he a confused boy who sedates his female victims with a syringe, has his way with them, and then drains them all of their blood with a razor? Martin is sent from Indianapolis to Braddock, a dying steel town outside Pittsburgh, to live with his elderly cousin, Tati Cuda. Cuda makes it clear what he believes about Martin.
Nosferatu. Nosferatu.
Reside ergo in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritu et Sancti.
Vampire. First, I will save your soul. Then, I will destroy you.
But to call Cuda intensely superstitious would be the understatement of the century.
Nosferatu.
Jeez, now who's the weirdo? Anyway, despite his cousin being a real stick in the mud, Martin tries to lead a normal life in the declining industrial city, struggling to establish connections with the people around him, including Cuda's granddaughter, Christina, Mrs. Santini, a lonely housewife, and even a local radio show host. But Martin can't help his bloodlust and seeks out new victims in his new city. George Andrew Romero was born on February 4th, 1940, to George Sr. and Ann Romero of Parkchester in the Bronx. His father was a Spaniard raised in Cuba, and his mother was Lithuanian. Most sources state that George's father was a commercial artist, but Hoberman and Rosenbaum's Midnight Movies is more specific, and that the elder George Romero manufactured promotional material to theaters. Romero was raised in the Catholic Church, which plays a large role in Martin. In a 2010 interview, Romero said, "I always take a little jab at it whenever I can. I played a priest in Martin to get back at all my confessors when I was growing up. I was raised Catholic, and I sort of learned early on, Well, I didn't learn. I just got turned off of it really pretty quickly.
I don't know what to believe about that.
As a little kid, George experienced the climate of fear from World War II, which included citywide blackouts in case of an air raid, and the pervasive fear of being bombed from above by foreign enemies.
When I was first watching the Tube, those were the things that got to me. And I remember the bombers flying over the Bronx where I grew up, and blackouts and things like that.
Yes.
And those scared the hell out of me, inordinately, I think.
Like many kids coming of age in the 50s, George loved EC horror comics, the gruesome morality tales loathed by uptight parents and teachers, but devoured by children. Like Romero's work, EC Comics often use horror conventions to explore socio-political themes, and they bubble with dark satirical humor. His childhood and adolescence seem to have been marked by loneliness and an escape into movies. In an interview with critic Tom Allen, Romero said, "I went to parochial schools from kindergarten to St. Helena's High School, just on the other side of Whitestone. In grammar school, I was skipped ahead, so I was one of the guys who didn't go to dances. In fact, one prom, I conned my folks into thinking I was going to the dance, and I went to 42nd Street, which had wild hot dogs, and sat through The Man Who Never Was twice." He loved all kinds of genre movies, Tarzan movies, cowboy movies, sci-fi, and horror movies. At age 11, his favorite movie was The Thing from Another World. The first film he said really scared him, but the filmmaker who would have the most influence over Romero was Michael Powell, and his favorite and most influential film was Tales of Hoffman. It was with Hoffman that Romero began to see filmmaking as a potential career. As a young man, he would venture into New York City to rent a projector and the print of the film. There was one other guy, though, that kept checking the print out when Romero didn't have it. He found out later that guy was fellow Michael Powell fanatic Martin Scorsese. At one point, Romero even wanted to do a remake of Powell's seminal horror classic Peeping Tom, adapting the story for contemporary times. When he was 14, George persuaded a wealthy uncle to lend him his 8mm camera, which the ambitious preteen used to make a short film called The Man from Meteor. During filming, George was arrested for throwing a burning dummy off a roof, and he had to be bailed out of jail by his parents. He recalled in an interview with NPR later, "It wasn't a serious arrest. I didn't have to spend the night in jail or anything." Romero's family shipped him off to a Connecticut prep school where he continued to make short films, and upon graduation, following an internship on North by Northwest, Romero ventured off to Pittsburgh to study art and drama at Carnegie Technical Institute, eventually renamed Carnegie Mellon. His study of fine art, especially the Spanish painters, would be a major influence over Romero's shot composition and his use of shadow and light. And the Burg would end up being synonymous with Romero in his films, a city that played a big role in shaping his career. And I love Pittsburgh. It's one of my favorite cities. You know, some girls dream of running away to New York or Los Angeles when they turn 18. I was dreaming of the glamour of Pittsburgh. Hey, zombies weren't born in New York City, and Los Angeles has too many producers named Todd and daytime soap actors. You can't stroll along the Monongahela chomping on a hoagie the size of your head there. It was in Pittsburgh I premiered my Grand Guignol insult comedy burlesque show at the Steelworks Tavern and Bowling Alley because Pittsburgh is a city that gets me. And they were the only ones that would book me. It was ahead of its time, I'm telling you. Anyway, I love the architecture, the people, the culture, the gray cloudy skies, the labor union history, and the Yinzer accent. And I still can't stop thinking about that seafood calzone I had while I was there. After leaving the university, Romero, along with his buddies John Russo and Russ Striner, used a $20,000 loan from Romero's wealthy uncle to start Latent Image, shooting commercials and industrial films for Pittsburgh businesses like Iron City Beer and Heinz Ketchup. One of Romero's first paid jobs as a director in the Steel City was for none other than Mr. Rogers. For my viewers outside North America, Fred Rogers is the beloved host of the long-running children's program Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, based out of Pittsburgh. Rogers was scheduled to undergo a tonsillectomy, and he had Romero film the operation for his show, thinking that showing children at home the experience might ease their fears of doctors and hospitals. Romero recalled, "He was the first guy who would hire me. Everyone from Pittsburgh who I know from that period who is still working in the industry in any capacity started with Fred. Fred was so supportive of people. He was a beautiful guy." It was the success of Leighton Image and his creative partnerships there that would lay the foundation for Night of the Living Dead.
I liked it here, first of all. I didn't, you know, it's funny, when I was in school, I never thought of making movies as a career. When I was growing up, I guess, it always seemed like the people that made movies were elves that lived in magic land somewhere, you know, on the planet of Hollywood. Yeah. And I never thought seriously that a person could go and do that, you know. That was magic, and that was unachievable, unattainable. But I always wanted to play around with it, and I guess I always have played around with it from the time I was a kid. Played around with the medium. I got my hands on 8mm movie cameras that my uncles had, and was always horsing around with it idly. And when I first started here in Pittsburgh with friends of mine that were at Carnegie Mellon, we were all doing it idly. We were just playing around with something that we enjoyed doing. And I think none of us initially were really thinking seriously that we were starting to build a career or build a business out of it. And a couple of years later, we set up, in fact, a company to do commercials and industrial films and like that here in Pittsburgh. And because this is a big corporate market, we got some jobs. There were advertising agencies here, and it was kind of being in the right place at the right time. It was right when people stopped shooting live television commercials, you know, pouring beer between the innings of the ball game and like that. Yeah. And film was, at that time, being used, just beginning to be used as a medium for creative expression in that form, in the form of television commercials and political campaigns and whatever else you can do with film on television. That's not the feature program material. And that's really how we started. And because of developing relationships with Pittsburghers, technicians in Pittsburgh, labs in Pittsburgh, and things like that, and having friends here that were all working together toward the same goal, we stayed. And we made Night of the Living Dead as a bunch of friends who got together to try to make a feature-length movie. And it was just circumstance and luck that it went out, number one, and got distributed, and number two, that it was successful.
Concerned about being pigeonholed as purely a horror director with Night's incredible success, Romero's next film was a Cassavetes-style art house drama, There's Always Vanilla. Romero stated that he considers it his worst film, and the one with the most production problems that didn't quite gel like it was supposed to. Vanilla was also a financial failure. Romero then followed it up with Season of the Witch, originally titled Jack's Wife, a drama with horror elements about an unhappy housewife who dabbles in witchcraft. Originally released as The Hungry Wives, the film, whatever the title, was also a financial failure, although I enjoy it and I see it as a thematic warm-up for Martin. Romero said if he could remake one of his films, it would be Season of the Witch, because he felt he didn't have the time and the resources to pull it off entirely. Still, Anna Bilder cited it as one of her major inspirations for The Love Witch.
So I was a bad girl.
George returned full force to the horror genre with The Crazies, which is now much beloved by horror fans, but at the time was also a financial flop. There's a lot of finger pointing back and forth between filmmaker and distributor as to why the film failed commercially. Distributed by Canvas Pictures, which mostly released exploitation films. They also released my Patreon pick for November, but more about that at the end of the show. The three strikes left Romero on the verge of bankruptcy, but it was around this time that Romero crossed paths with Richard Rubinstein, the man who would become his business partner for the next decade. In the mid-1970s, they formed Laurel Entertainment. There's an entire book that's all about an in-depth look at the business side of Laurel and the partnership between Rubinstein and Romero called George A. Romero's Independent Cinema, Horror Industry, Economics. I'm linking it down below if you'd like to check it out. Rubinstein, in spite of his quirks, was an ideal producer for Romero in that he would find the money and take care of the business, trusting Romero's artistic vision.
I think that we tend to operate in more European style in terms of the way we produce and the way George directs, and that we tend to follow Sarris's auteur theory of direction, in that I see my function as a producer in terms of providing George Romero with a brush, palette, and canvas. And his creative control is absolute in terms of the film itself, that he's the script writer, that he's the director, and that he's the editor. And it's totally the product of one man's vision on a creative level.
To get Romero back in the black, Romero and Rubinstein produced a series of sports documentaries for television called The Winners, which ran from 1973 to 1975. It was the success of The Winners that allowed Laurel Entertainment to seek financing for their first feature film, Martin. It also supplied the film stock. Cinematographer Michael Gornick said that Martin was shot on short ends of the reversal film used for The Winners. It was also through The Winners that George met the Bubba brothers, Tony and Pasquale. The Bubbas would not only work with Romero for several years, but they provided major creative contributions to Martin. Being born and raised in Braddock, the Bubba brothers had made a series of documentaries about the city's local culture and its decline following the closure of the steel mills. The documentaries impressed Romero, and along with a book he had read about the American steel industry, it provided the bones for Martin's story. Cuda's house in the film was the Bubba family house, with the Bubba's mother providing catering. Romero noted very little set dressing was needed, and the photo album of the curse-afflicted ancestors is none other than the Bubba family album. Martin would also be George's first collaboration with two very important members of the Romero Repertory Company, makeup effects pioneer Tom Savini and Romero's second wife, Christine. Romero actually knew Christine's parents before he ever met her. Their house provided the main location for Season of the Witch. A young actress in New York, Christine was home in Pittsburgh when she needed to get a voiceover tape done, and her parents suggested she should get in touch with George Romero. The two met for dinner a few times when they both happened to be in New York. Officially separated from his first wife, Romero asked Christine if she'd like to go out with him. It was around this time that Rubinstein had secured financing for Martin, and George completed a script in 5 days. Many of the couple's first dates were spent discussing the writing of the script, and Christine cites Martin as their first collaboration. George and Christine were married for 29 years, and they had 2 children together and collaborated on all of Romero's films from Martin up until Land of the Dead. I was actually really sad when I found out they got divorced, because even though I didn't know either of them personally, they sounded like they were so inseparable and they had a gift of creatively inspiring one another. Tom Savini, the godfather of gore, influenced a generation with his pioneering effects work, in addition to being an actor and a stuntman. We'll probably see him again on this channel, so I'm mostly going to talk about how he got involved with George Romero. They initially crossed paths when Savini was still a theater kid at an all-boys Catholic school. He screen tested for a film that unfortunately didn't end up getting made. Later, hearing about Night of the Living Dead being made, Savini followed Romero around with his makeup portfolio. Romero was impressed by the kid's work, but unfortunately, it was around this time Savini was drafted into Vietnam and he couldn't work on the film. Instead, Savini's effects debut was Bob Clark's Death Dream, followed by 1974's Deranged. For a while, Savini did repertory theater in Fayetteville, North Carolina, before returning to Pittsburgh to attend Carnegie Mellon on the GI Bill. Savini came down to Laurel Entertainment's office to audition for the role of Martin, but he found out the part had already been cast. But, not to be deterred, he again showed Romero his effects portfolio. Savini would not only go on to do the special effects and some stunt work for Martin, but he ended up being cast in the supporting role of Christina's philandering fiancé, Arthur. Christine Romero said the role was written specifically for Tom. I got 2 dear friends from Pittsburgh. If they're watching. The germ for Martin was Romero pondering about what it would like to have a classic monster in a very modern setting. The contrast of a vampire in a dying industrial town being drained slowly of its livelihood by forces beyond its control. Romero said, "I just went off on this trip about if a vampire existed today, he'd really have a bad time. He'd probably be working the street, you know, doing something to get by. He'd need a new ID every 20 years and shit like that." I got enamored with the idea of taking what in fiction had been an immortal character and putting him in a very mortal world, making him much more mortal. As I said in my intro, George Romero has cited Martin as his personal favorite of his films and the one that's closest to his initial vision. It's also my personal favorite of his films as well, and just one of my all-time favorites. I still remember one summer when I was a teenager, my best friend and I just kept watching Martin over and over and over again as if it was on loop. I think Martin is George Romero's most heartfelt movie, and the one that had the deepest emotional resonance for me personally. I think the screenplay is fantastic, very honest, empathetic, and well observed. There are more heartbreakingly true moments in Martin than I've seen in 1,000 more conventional Hollywood dramas. It's funny, in a few interviews I've read with him, George admits to being insecure about writing, but of his horror contemporaries, he's always struck me as someone who, if he hadn't been a filmmaker, he would have been a novelist.
Yeah, I usually write long scripts. Martin was a long script that was really a long script. I mean, and the first cut came out at almost 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Wow.
This is a long script that seems long. It's not really long. There's so much description, and if you read those pages, there's so much action described in great paragraphs where I got carried away, you know, describing the action itself. And some of those things take a second and a half, you know.
It's not just the formatting of his scripts, which they're written in novelistic style, but I think there's something about how he constructs and portrays his characters and creates atmosphere and mood from the setting that it strikes me as somebody who has a strong literary bent. The harrowing home invasion sequence is some of Romero's best work, and the opening assault on the train is right up there too, which sets the movie off on a really disturbing tone. Both linger in the mind long after the movie is finished. Michael Gornick's photography is also striking, contrasting the very real post-industrial decay of Braddock in a cinema verite style with the more expressionistic gothic of Martin's fantasies, and then successfully marrying those styles where the two worlds collide in Tati Cuda's house. The atmosphere and emotion is enhanced greatly by John Rubinstein's haunting, melancholic score. It's not only one of my favorite horror movie scores, it's one of my all-time favorite scores. And the performances are all wonderful, breathing life into these complicated characters. Christine Forrest Romero gives an honest, unaffected performance as Christina, and Lincoln Maazel brings a natural gravitas to Tati Cuda. George previously worked with Lincoln in a church-funded film about the plight of the elderly, The Amusement Park, which is more disturbing in some ways than his horror output. Lincoln was a fellow New York transplant to Pittsburgh from a family of Russian Jewish immigrants. Show business was in his blood, as his father was a renowned New York Metropolitan Opera concertmaster. He started out in vaudeville and moved to Los Angeles to pursue a film career. He relocated to Pittsburgh for the sake of his son, a music prodigy whose conducting teacher took a job as Pittsburgh's music conductor. Maazel, in addition to giving private music lessons, appeared frequently in Pittsburgh Playhouse productions, which is where Romero spotted him. Maazel died at the ripe old age of 106. But without a doubt, the performance that anchors the film is John Amplas' sensitive turn as Martin. It's putting it mildly to say that Martin does some horrible things, but thanks to the way the character is written and capably portrayed by Amplas, not to mention with some help from that score, Martin always remains sympathetic. Romero originally wrote the character as a middle-aged man, but after spotting 27-year-old Amplas in a Pittsburgh Playhouse production of Philemon, Romero rewrote the script, tailoring the character to Amplas. There's not much information available about Amplas, only that he came from a hardscrabble working-class background in a small Pennsylvania steel town, much like Braddock. Amplas does so much with his eyes, and his body language in that character perfectly conveys that gangly adolescent awkwardness, and also the body language of someone who's already sustained too many emotional injuries for the short time they've been on this planet. Amplas expertly plays a multifaceted character and imbues him with a raw vulnerability that's extremely moving. Christine Romero said of all the unknown actors they worked with, there's two she thought would go on to be big stars, Ed Harris and John Amplas. She was disappointed that Amplas didn't end up getting more film work.
Now that's crazy. Those movies are crazy.
Amplas said following Martin, he flew to Italy to screen test for Dario Argento, but unfortunately nothing came of it. He'd work with Romero again on Dawn of the Dead, Creepshow, Night Riders, Day of the Dead, and an uncredited role in The Dark Half. He continued a long and distinguished stage career and taught acting at Point Park College for 2 decades. In classic horror films, the monster is out there, mythical creatures in foreign fairy tale-ish settings or invaders from other worlds. But with horror filmmakers of the 1970s, the monster's in here. The monster is us. Around the time Martin was made, Romero expressed interest in the story of the Sawney Bean clan and possibly making a movie about it, but his contemporary Wes Craven beat him to it. In an interview with Twilight Zone magazine, Romero said, Martin is designed to show that all those supernatural monsters that are part of our literary tradition are, in essence, expurgations of ourselves. They're beasts we've created in order to exorcise the monster from within us. By distinguishing them from us, we could destroy them. I tried to show in Martin that you can't just slice off this evil part of ourselves and throw it away. It's a permanent part of us, and we better try to understand it. Martin presents a world where old world superstition and the deteriorating modern world collide. Romero originally wanted Martin to be shot entirely in black and white, but for distribution reasons decided that only Martin's fantasy sequences would be shot in black and white, and the rest would be in color. I actually think this is a better choice, and a lot more effective. While Cuda rigidly clings to superstitious beliefs from the old world, Martin is more ambivalent, insisting to others that there is no magic, while he's still believing that he's an 84-year-old vampire.
Things only seem to be magic. There is no real magic. There's no real magic ever.
Shy and socially awkward, he's used to being abused and misunderstood, scapegoated as a monster by his family. He seems torn between trying to convince the people around him that he's not a monster versus just embracing it. There's some empowerment in being a monster because at least there's a sense of escape and identity, even if it's one that's been foisted upon him. The collective delusion that he's a vampire has gotten tangled into his sexuality, his vampiric ritual replacing the romantic and sexual connection he deeply desires. It reminds me of Cat People, the 1942 RKO horror film in which Irina, a young Serbian woman, isolates herself because she believes she's a descendant of a race of werecats who will morph into a wild panther if she's intimate with anyone. For both characters, old world mythology and a belief of their own monstrousness betrays fears about themselves and fears of deep emotional connection. Martin, although it comes out in psychotic ways, is kind of a romantic, and he's frequently distressed and frustrated when reality fails to live up to his fantasies. The film really captures the pessimism and alienation of the Malaise era and the beginning of the death of the American dream for the working class. In addition to economic recession and inflation, global competition intensified and companies began relocating their plants to countries offering cheaper labor. Steel mill closures were among the worst, with cities like Youngstown, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Detroit facing devastating losses. Rural areas were devastated as well, with mill closures wiping out half of a region's job base in some cases.
So that Bill Lumberg's stock will go up 1/4 of a point.
This began the hollowing out of formerly middle-class union jobs. Labor unrest returned with a vengeance. In 1970 alone, almost 6,000 strikes took place, workers frustrated by stagnant wages and declining work conditions. Employers in the state were not afraid to use violence to quell a strike. But many workers also felt their union leadership had sold them out, getting too cozy with management and political leaders, rather than protecting the interests of their members. Braddock, during its heyday in the 20s, had a population of 20,879 people. When Martin was shot there in 1976, the population was 6,552. In the 2020 census, the population is 1,721. You still see the devastating impact today. In my old stomping ground, New Orleans, where the Longshoremen's Union headquarters used to be, is now a Harrah's casino. With the loss of jobs and economic opportunity comes the deterioration of identity, family, and community. In Martin, people are moving away, especially young people, drifting in hope that somewhere else will offer a more stable future for them.
I just gotta get out here, that's all. I say go to all of you.
If you don't want to be here, then we don't need you.
I want to be here. Well, I've been here since I was a kid. Hey, but I'm a good mechanic. I should be fixing cars. What am I doing here?
Go. Like William Gorinskas. Like Molinovsky's. It's good for Casina not to be married yet. She's young for her years.
The church, a staple of many working-class communities, was destroyed by natural disaster, and the community can't afford to repair it. With all these devastating losses, the people in the film have become lost souls, desperately seeking something they can hold on to, whether it's a genuine feeling of connection or temporary escape. While the modern world is alienating, tradition offers no solace either. Cuda is just too rigid, too unyielding, and too in denial about what's happening in the modern world to offer really any positive alternative. He too is disconnected and ultimately alone. It's pretty telling that he refuses to have a phone in the house. He drives away his granddaughter, the only person he could be close to. He ends up with no one, except the mean old ladies who frequent his store. Martin, like many of the films of the 1970s, is an evocative exploration of alienation and loneliness. I think it's just as profound as Taxi Driver or Five Easy Pieces, two of my other favorite films from the era, but I think Martin gets ignored more because of snobbery against the horror genre. Throughout the film, Martin wants badly to connect and to belong. One of my favorite scenes in the film is this scene with the neighborhood parade. This was completely unscripted. It just happened to be going on during filmmaking and the filmmakers took advantage of it. Not only is it a great slice of life, but it illustrates so much thematically. Martin keeps attempting to reach out, to join in with others and to belong, but he always finds himself on the periphery of the group rather than part of it. He struggles to make connections with others and often ends up disappointed. Christina is the character who's the most sympathetic to Martin. She tries to stick up for him to Cuda, but ultimately she doesn't have the know-how or the life experience to really help him, and then she just ends up avoiding the issue because she feels powerless to do anything about it. In the end, he just feels abandoned by her. But she's trapped and alone too. She's stuck in a terrible relationship with a fiancé who cheats on her and treats her as if she doesn't matter, and she knows she has no future in Braddock.
You're still here.
I guess he couldn't come. I guess,
I don't like Arthur. It makes you feel bad.
Oh, Martin, it isn't Arthur. I don't expect any more from Arthur. It's everything. It's everything.
Abby Santini, the lonely housewife who strikes up a relationship with Martin, is desperate for affection and validation that she's not receiving from her cheating husband. But she's too mired in depression and self-loathing to truly connect.
Take away a piece of my brain or something. Boy, do I wish what you have is catching.
Some people think it is catching. In the movies, it's catching.
Give it to me. Please.
The numerous adulterous couples in the film seem to support Martin's disappointed observation that people form relationships for selfish or superficial reasons.
I see people together. They don't talk. Not really. They don't say what they mean.
Martin even reaches out to a local DJ for connection and understanding, but instead, he becomes more of an amusing gimmick.
Nightimers have been talking to the Count. Yes, a real, live, honest-to-goodness vampire. And if you have any questions you'd like to pass on to the Count, how about giving me a call here at 555-1650? Be back in a moment. Talk about a sale. This week's sale at Mason's Accent Storage Tables. Some of our best-selling Count, are you there? Freestyles and four finishes. Hey, Count. Low price that defies comparison. Count, are you there, man? Listen to these values.
Hello?
Say, man, where can I get a hold of you? This is really going over big. I mean, it's very good. I mean, we have a lot of people calling, and they're very interested. Count, I'd like to talk to you. I'd like to have you come down to the station.
Wow, $66. Martin ends up exasperated by people, finding them too self-involved and unpredictable to form any genuine connection with them.
In real life, In real life, you can't get people to do what you want them to do.
Martin was written after a painful transition period in George Romero's life, following near financial ruin and the deterioration of his first marriage. I think as a result, it reflects even more painful and honest observations than even Romero's other work. As a sensitive, creative person with a strong independent streak, I think Martin expresses some of George's own struggles and frustrations with loneliness and feeling misunderstood. The pain of a deep-feeling person yearning for meaningful connection in a world where most people just seem to crave superficial ones. It was with Martin that Romero got his groove back. Since he had made a film about a vampire in a small town, Romero was in talks to direct an adaptation of Salem's Lot. When it transitioned from being a theatrical release to a TV movie, Romero left the project, but he maintained his friendship with Stephen King, which then resulted in Creepshow in 1982. Shortly following Martin's release, George Romero wrote and directed Dawn of the Dead, which would be his highest-grossing film. Well, my darlings, much like the vampires, I'm going to get ready to get cozy back in my coffin. But join me in November when we take a dive back into the sleaze pit, a charming story about what happened to the good times, Teenage Tramp. And for November's Patreon selection, a couple of you have requested this, and who am I to deny my viewers? One of the most infamous exploitation titles of the 70s that was considered the lowest example of bad taste. But hey, bad taste is what entertainment is all about. I'm talking Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. But for now, happy Halloween.